My name is Detective Jack Morrison, and I've been working homicide in Chicago for 23 years. I've seen it all, or so I thought, until the Sarah Chen case landed on my desk on that grey Tuesday morning in October. It was supposed to be a routine cold case review, just another file gathering dust in the basement archives of the 14th Precinct. The department had assigned me to review old cases as part of a new initiative to clear unsolved murders. But what I found in Sarah Chen's file would haunt me for the next 3 years. Sarah Chen, 26 years old, found dead in her Lincoln Park apartment 3 years ago. The case had been officially closed as a suicide by Detective Mike Rodriguez, but something about it never sat right with me from the moment I opened that manila folder. The crime scene photos showed a young woman who had everything to live for: a promising career as a software engineer at a rapidly growing tech startup, no history of depression or mental health issues, and wedding plans just 6 months away with her boyfriend of 4 years, Marcus Thompson. Yet somehow, everyone believed she had taken her own life in a moment of despair that no one could explain. The original detective, Mike Rodriguez, had retired shortly after closing the case, citing stress and health issues, and the file was thin, too thin for my liking. As I spread the photographs across my desk that rainy Tuesday morning, studying Sarah's young face in her driver's license photo, I made a promise to Sarah Chen and to myself that I wouldn't let this case stay buried. In the archives, there was something in her eyes, even in that DMV photo, that spoke of determination and hope, not despair. I had a gut feeling that had served me well over the years, and it was screaming that this case was all wrong. Asterisk, the first thing that struck me as I examined the crime scene photos with fresh eyes was the position of Sarah's body and the staging of the scene. Sarah was found hanging in her bedroom closet, suspended from the closet rod by a climbing rope that she allegedly owned for her weekend hiking trips. But the chair that supposedly helped her reach the closet rod was positioned 3 feet away from where it should have been, knocked over on its side near the bedroom door. The crime scene photos showed clear drag marks on the beige carpet, something the original investigation had dismissed as irrelevant, claiming they were from the paramedics' moving equipment. But I had worked enough crime scenes to know the difference between drag marks from medical equipment and those from furniture being deliberately moved. The angle of the marks and their depth suggested the chair had been dragged away from the closet after Sarah's death, not during any rescue attempt. I pulled the coroner's report and found another red flag that made my blood run cold. Dr. Patricia Williams, the county's most experienced medical examiner, had noted defensive wounds on Sarah's knuckles and fingernails, consistent with a struggle. But these findings had been completely overlooked in the final report that ruled the death a suicide. The photographs of Sarah's hands showed clear bruising across her knuckles and torn fingernails with what appeared to be skin tissue underneath. Classic signs that she had fought for her life. I decided to pay Dr. Williams a visit at the county morgue, hoping she might remember details that hadn't made it into the official report. She was a meticulous woman in her 50s who had performed thousands of autopsies during her career and had a reputation for thoroughness that was legendary. In the department, when I showed her the case file and asked about her findings, her expression darkened immediately, and she glanced around nervously before asking me to step into her private office. She told me she had tried to voice her concerns about the suicide ruling at the time, but her supervisor, Dr. Richard Hawkins, had pressured her to keep quiet and not rock the boat. The defensive wounds, the broken fingernails, and the bruising pattern on Sarah's neck all suggested homicide, not suicide. But her objections had been dismissed, and her supplemental report requesting further investigation had mysteriously disappeared. From the file, Sarah's boyfriend, Marcus Thompson, had been the one to find her body, or so his statement claimed. According to his detailed account to Detective Rodriguez, he had come to check on Sarah after she hadn't answered his calls or texts for 2 days, which he said was completely unlike her. He claimed to have used his spare key to enter the apartment and discovered her body in the bedroom closet. His alibi seemed solid at first glance, backed up by hotel receipts and conference materials. He claimed to have been at a 3-day business conference in Milwaukee during the estimated time of death, attending seminars on emerging technologies in software development. I decided to dig deeper into Marcus's background and discovered some interesting facts that the original investigation had barely touched. He worked for a tech startup called Innovate Tech Solutions that had been struggling financially despite receiving several rounds of venture capital funding. More interesting was the fact that Sarah, who worked in the company's financial department, had recently discovered some irregularities in the company's books and had been asking uncomfortable questions about discrepancies in vendor payments and expense reports. According to her co-workers, whom I interviewed extensively, Sarah had been working late nights for weeks before her death, trying to reconcile financial records that didn't add up. She had mentioned to her best friend, Jessica Martinez, that she had found evidence of what appeared to be systematic fraud and was planning to report her findings to the authorities. I drove to Milwaukee to verify Marcus's alibi personally, something the original investigation had done only through phone calls. I spoke with hotel staff, conference organizers, and other attendees who might have remembered seeing Marcus during the 3-day event, while Marcus had indeed registered for the conference and had a hotel room. Several witnesses couldn't recall seeing him at the scheduled events, and his name didn't appear on any of the sign-in sheets for the seminars he claimed to have attended. The hotel keycard records, which I obtained through a warrant, showed that his room had been accessed only twice during the 3-day conference, both times late at night around 11 p.m. and early morning around 6 a.m. This gave him a window of opportunity to drive back to Chicago, which was only a 2-hour drive, commit the murder, and return to Milwaukee before anyone noticed his absence. When I returned to the evidence room to examine the physical evidence from Sarah's apartment, I discovered that several key items were missing from the storage facility. The laptop that Sarah had been using to document the financial irregularities at Innovate Tech was nowhere to be found. Despite being clearly listed in the initial evidence log with a detailed description and serial number, the climbing rope used in the hanging had also disappeared, along with Sarah's iPhone, which would have contained text messages, emails, and call logs that could have provided crucial information about her state of mind and activities in the days before her death. I confronted the evidence clerk, Tommy Martinez, who had been working in the evidence room for over a decade and had a reputation for being meticulous about maintaining the chain of custody. Tommy was nervous and evasive. When I questioned him about the missing items, sweating profusely and avoiding eye contact as he shuffled through paperwork. After some pressure and the threat of an internal investigation, he admitted that Detective Rodriguez had checked out these items shortly before his retirement and had never returned them, despite multiple reminders and formal requests from the evidence room supervisor. This was highly irregular and against department protocol, which required all evidence to remain in custody unless specifically released by a court order or destroyed according to established procedures. I tried to contact Rodriguez to ask about the missing evidence, but his phone was disconnected, and his forwarding address led to an empty apartment in a rundown complex on the south side of the city. The landlord told me that Rodriguez had left suddenly in the middle of the night, owing 2 months' rent and leaving behind only some old furniture and empty beer bottles. It was becoming clear that someone had deliberately sabotaged this investigation, and I was determined to find out who and why, even if it meant taking on corruption within my own department. I decided to focus my investigation on the financial irregularities that Sarah had discovered at Innovate Tech Solutions, believing that this might provide the motive for her murder. With the help of forensic accountant Linda Reeves, who had worked with the department on several white-collar crime cases, I began examining the company's financial records, bank statements, and vendor contracts. What we found was a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that had been siphoning money from the company for over 2 years, involving fake vendor accounts, inflated invoices, and payments to offshore accounts controlled by Marcus Thompson and 2 other company executives. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity, creating shell companies with legitimate-sounding names that provided services that were difficult to verify, such as consulting and software licensing. Sarah had stumbled upon this operation while working on a routine quarterly audit and had compiled evidence that could have sent all 3 men to prison for decades. Her personal laptop, which was missing from evidence, had contained spreadsheets documenting the fraudulent transactions, copies of suspicious invoices, and email correspondence that revealed the scope of the conspiracy. The total amount stolen was over $2 million, certainly enough motive for murder when faced with exposure and prosecution. I obtained warrants to examine the personal financial records of Marcus and his co-conspirators, David Park and Jennifer Walsh, both senior executives at Innovate. The evidence showed large cash deposits, expensive purchases, and lifestyle changes that couldn't be explained by their legitimate salaries. Marcus had purchased a new BMW M3 and a vacation home in the Bahamas just weeks before Sarah's death, paying cash for both transactions. Park had been making regular trips to Las Vegas and had purchased expensive jewelry for his wife, while Walsh had invested in several real estate properties and had opened multiple bank accounts in different states. The pattern was clear. These 3 had been living well beyond their means using stolen money, and Sarah Chen had threatened to expose their entire operation. While canvassing Sarah's neighborhood again, going door to door with her photograph and asking residents if they remembered anything unusual from the night of her death, I discovered that the original investigation had missed a crucial witness, Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, an elderly woman in her 70s who lived across the hall from Sarah in the same apartment building, had been in the hospital recovering from hip replacement surgery during the initial investigation and had never been interviewed by Detective Rodriguez or any other officer. When I knocked on her door and introduced myself, she immediately invited me in for coffee and told me she had been wondering for years why no one had ever asked her about that terrible night. Mrs. Vasquez was sharp and articulate despite her age, and she had a clear memory of the events surrounding Sarah's death. She revealed that she had seen Marcus leaving Sarah's apartment on the night of the murder, carrying what appeared to be a laptop bag and looking agitated and disheveled. This directly contradicted his statement that he hadn't been to Sarah's apartment for several days before finding her body. Mrs. Vasquez was certain about the timing because she had been watching her favorite late-night talk show, The Tonight Show, when she heard loud arguing and what sounded like furniture being moved around in Sarah's apartment. Concerned for her young neighbor's safety, she had looked through her peephole and seen Marcus in the hallway around midnight, pacing back and forth and talking on his cell phone in hushed, urgent tones. The coroner had estimated Sarah's time of death between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., placing Marcus at the scene during the critical window when the murder occurred. Mrs. Vasquez also mentioned that she had tried to tell the police about this when they returned to the building the next day to interview residents, but the officer she spoke with, whom she described as a heavy-set man with a mustache matching Rodriguez's description, had dismissed her account and told her she must have been confused due to her medication. She had been so upset by this treatment that she had called the police station several times to report what she had seen, but her calls were never returned. Armed with Mrs. Vasquez's testimony, the financial evidence, and the inconsistencies in the original investigation, I decided to confront Marcus Thompson directly, rather than wait for a formal arrest warrant. I found him at his new office in a sleek downtown high-rise, a luxurious space that his embezzled money had helped finance, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan and expensive modern furniture. When I showed him my badge and asked if we could talk privately, his confident demeanor immediately shifted to one of barely concealed panic. I laid out the evidence I had gathered methodically, watching his face grow paler with each revelation. I told him about Mrs. Vasquez's testimony, the missing evidence, the financial irregularities, and the problems with his alibi. When I mentioned that we had traced the embezzled money and were preparing to freeze his assets, he realized his situation was hopeless. Marcus broke down and confessed to killing Sarah, but he insisted it was never supposed to happen and that he had never intended for things to go so far. According to his tearful confession, he had gone to Sarah's apartment that night to convince her to keep quiet about the embezzlement, offering her a substantial bribe and even a partnership in the scheme. When she refused and threatened to call the police immediately, he panicked and grabbed her to stop her from reaching her phone. The struggle that Dr. Williams had detected in the autopsy was real and violent. Marcus had strangled Sarah with his bare hands in a moment of desperation, and then, realizing what he had done, had spent hours staging the scene to look like a suicide. He had taken her laptop and phone to destroy the evidence she had compiled against him and his partners, and had used the climbing rope from her closet to hang her body, hoping that the staged suicide would end any investigation before it could expose the embezzlement scheme. Marcus's confession led me to an even more disturbing revelation about corruption within the Chicago Police Department. Through tears and obvious fear for his safety, Marcus revealed that Detective Mike Rodriguez had been paid $50,000 to ensure the case was closed quickly and quietly as a suicide. According to Marcus, Rodriguez had approached him just 2 days after Sarah's body was discovered, claiming that he knew Marcus was involved and offering to make the investigation go away for the right price. Rodriguez had systematically suppressed evidence, intimidated potential witnesses like Mrs. Vasquez, and pressured the coroner's office to rule the death a suicide despite Dr. Williams's objections. The missing evidence from the evidence room had been personally removed and destroyed by Rodriguez to eliminate any chance of the case being reopened by future investigators. Rodriguez had also falsified witness statements and had failed to follow up on obvious leads that would have exposed the murder. This explained why Rodriguez had retired so suddenly after closing the case, and why he had disappeared after leaving the force, taking his payoff money and fleeing before anyone could discover his role in the cover-up. I immediately reported my findings to Internal Affairs, Captain Sarah Mitchell, and District Attorney Robert Chen, who ironically shared the same last name as the victim but was not related. A manhunt was launched for Rodriguez, involving the FBI due to the interstate, the nature of his flight, and the federal implications of police corruption. Rodriguez was eventually found 3 months later, living under an assumed name in a small coastal town in Mexico, where he had been working as a bartender and living off his payoff money. His extradition took several months due to legal complications, but he was eventually brought back to Chicago to face charges of corruption, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder after the fact. With Marcus in custody and cooperating fully with the investigation, I was able to build strong cases against his 2 accomplices in the embezzlement scheme. David Park, the company's chief technology officer, and Jennifer Walsh, the vice president of operations, had been Marcus's partners in the financial fraud and had helped him cover up Sarah's murder after the fact. Park had provided Marcus with the false alibi by backdating conference, registration records, and bribing hotel staff to corroborate his story about attending the Milwaukee conference. He had also helped Marcus establish the offshore accounts used to launder the stolen money and had provided technical expertise to hack into the company's financial systems and cover their tracks. Walsh had been responsible for creating the fake vendor companies and had used her position to approve fraudulent invoices and payments. She had also helped Marcus dispose of Sarah's laptop and phone by having them destroyed at an electronics recycling facility that her family owned, ensuring that the evidence of their crimes would never be recovered. Both accomplices were arrested in coordinated raids and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, embezzlement, and money laundering. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including financial records, email communications, and Marcus's detailed confession about their roles in both the embezzlement and the cover-up. Faced with the possibility of life sentences, both Park and Walsh quickly agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimony provided additional details about the murder and the subsequent cover-up that helped fill in gaps in the timeline and provided corroboration for Marcus's confession. Park revealed that Marcus had called him in a panic on the night of the murder, asking for help with establishing his alibi and begging him to confirm that he had been at the conference. Walsh admitted to helping Marcus dispose of evidence and had even provided him with cleaning supplies and advice on how to stage the suicide scene based on crime shows she had watched on television. Throughout this investigation, I had been in regular contact with Sarah's family, who had never given up hope that the truth about their daughter's death would eventually come to light. Her parents, David and Linda Chen, both retired teachers who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s, had never believed the suicide ruling and had been fighting for years to have the case reopened. They had hired 3 different private investigators. Over the years, spending their life savings and retirement funds in pursuit of the truth about their daughter's death. They had written letters to the mayor, the police chief, and even the governor, pleading for someone to take another look at the case. When I called to tell them about Marcus's arrest and confession, the relief in their voices was palpable. But it was mixed with anger about the years of injustice they had endured and the corruption that had allowed their daughter's killer to walk free. Sarah's younger brother, Kevin, who had been a promising pre-med student at Northwestern University, had dropped out of college after her death and had struggled with depression, anxiety, and substance abuse as he tried to cope with the loss of his sister and the frustration of knowing that something was wrong with the official story. The family had been torn apart by grief and the stress of fighting a system that seemed determined to ignore their pleas for justice. I arranged for them to meet with District Attorney Robert Chen to discuss the charges against Marcus and his accomplices. and to explain the legal process that would follow. It was one of the most difficult conversations of my career, but also one of the most important, as I watched this family begin to heal after years of pain and uncertainty. David Chen, Sarah's father, told me that his daughter had always believed in justice and doing the right thing, and that she would have been proud to know that her death had led to the exposure of corruption and the protection of other potential victims. Preparing for trial was a massive undertaking that required coordinating with multiple agencies, witnesses, and experts from across the country. District Attorney Robert Chen assigned his most experienced prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, to lead the case against Marcus Thompson. Santos was a veteran prosecutor with over 15 years of experience in complex murder cases and had never lost a first-degree murder trial. Together, we worked tirelessly to build an airtight case that would ensure Marcus received the maximum sentence for his crimes. We had his detailed confession, but we knew that his defense attorney, the high-profile criminal lawyer Jonathan Pierce, would try to have it thrown out or claim it was coerced. Pierce was known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to create reasonable doubt in even the strongest cases. We needed to present a compelling case based on physical evidence, witness testimony, and expert analysis that would convince a jury beyond any reasonable doubt. Dr. Patricia Williams agreed to testify about her autopsy findings that had been ignored in the original investigation, and she was prepared to explain in detail how the defensive wounds and bruising patterns proved that Sarah had been murdered. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, despite her advanced age and some health issues, was eager to testify about seeing Marcus at Sarah's apartment on the night of the murder. Forensic accountant Linda Reeves would explain the embezzlement scheme and Marcus's financial motive for killing Sarah to prevent exposure of his crimes. We also had the testimony of Marcus's accomplices, David Park and Jennifer Walsh, who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for plea deals that would reduce their sentences from life imprisonment to 15 and 12 years respectively. The defense team tried every legal maneuver available to suppress evidence and delay the trial, filing dozens of motions challenging everything from the validity of the search warrants to the admissibility of Marcus's confession. Judge Patricia Harrison, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom, denied most of these motions and kept the case moving forward toward trial. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, almost 4 years after Sarah's death, in the historic Cook County Criminal Courts building. The courtroom was packed with Sarah's family and friends, members of the media who had picked up the story of the detective who refused to give up, and curious observers who had followed the case through news reports and social media. Prosecutor Maria Santos delivered a powerful opening statement that laid out the timeline of events leading to Sarah's murder and the evidence that would prove Marcus Thompson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. She described Sarah as a dedicated professional who had discovered a massive fraud and had been killed to prevent her from exposing the truth. The defense attorney, Jonathan Pierce, tried to paint Marcus as a man who had made mistakes but wasn't a cold-blooded killer, arguing that Sarah's death was the result of a struggle that had gotten out of hand and that Marcus had panicked in the aftermath. He claimed that Marcus's confession had been coerced and that the evidence against him was circumstantial at best. Over the next 3 weeks, we presented our case methodically and thoroughly. Dr. Williams's testimony about the defensive wounds was particularly compelling, as she used photographs and medical diagrams to show the jury exactly how Sarah had fought for her life. Mrs. Vasquez made an excellent witness despite her age, clearly and confidently describing what she had seen on the night of the murder. The jury listened intently as forensic accountant Linda Reeves explained the embezzlement scheme using charts and financial records to show how Marcus and his accomplices had stolen over $2 million from their company. When Marcus's accomplices, David Park and Jennifer Walsh, testified against him, describing his panicked phone calls and desperate requests for help with his alibi, the case against him became overwhelming. The prosecution also presented evidence of Marcus's lavish spending in the weeks before Sarah's death, including receipts for the BMW and the vacation home that he had purchased with stolen money. After 3 days of intense deliberation, during which the jury requested to review key pieces of evidence including Dr. Williams's autopsy report and Mrs. Vasquez's testimony, they returned to the courtroom with their verdict. The tension in the room was palpable as the jury foreman stood to read the decision that would determine Marcus Thompson's fate. Marcus was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit embezzlement, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom erupted in applause and tears as Sarah's family finally heard the words they had been waiting for after 4 long years of fighting for justice. Marcus showed no emotion as the verdict was read, staring straight ahead with a blank expression, but his family members in the gallery were visibly shaken and several were crying. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded Marcus to custody without bail, noting that he had already proven himself to be a flight risk and a danger to the community. Outside the courthouse, I was surrounded by reporters asking about the case and the corruption that had allowed a murderer to walk free for so long. I kept my comments brief, focusing on the fact that justice had finally been served for Sarah Chen and her family, and that the investigation had exposed serious problems within the police department that were being addressed. The Chen family held an emotional press conference on the courthouse steps, thanking everyone who had worked to bring their daughter's killer to justice. David Chen spoke about the importance of never giving up when you know something is wrong, and Linda Chen dedicated the verdict to her daughter's memory, saying that Sarah's spirit had guided them through the darkest times. Kevin Chen, who had gotten sober and returned to college during the investigation, announced that he was changing his major to criminal justice and planned to become a detective himself to help other families find the truth about their loved ones. Marcus Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Sarah's murder, plus an additional 25 years for the embezzlement and conspiracy charges. Judge Harrison delivered a scathing rebuke of Marcus's actions during the sentencing hearing, noting that he had not only taken an innocent life, but had also corrupted the justice system to cover up his crime and had shown no remorse for his actions. She described his crimes as particularly heinous because they involved the betrayal of trust from someone Sarah had loved and planned to marry. The judge also noted that Marcus's actions had caused immeasurable pain to Sarah's family and had undermined public confidence in the police department and the justice system. Detective Mike Rodriguez was extradited from Mexico and faced his own trial for corruption, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder after the fact. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including bank records showing the $50,000 payment from Marcus, testimony from other officers about his suspicious behavior during the original investigation, and his own admissions to Mexican authorities when he was arrested. Rodriguez was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to the Chen family for the pain and suffering his corruption had caused. David Park and Jennifer Walsh received sentences of 15 and 12 years, respectively, for their roles in the conspiracy. and all three defendants were ordered to pay millions of dollars in restitution to Innovate Tech Solutions and its investors. The tech startup, where the embezzlement had taken place, was forced into bankruptcy due to the financial damage caused by the fraud, and its remaining assets were used to compensate investors and creditors who had been defrauded. Sarah's family filed a civil lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department for the mishandling of the original investigation and the corruption that had allowed Marcus to escape justice for so long. The lawsuit eventually resulted in a multi-million-dollar settlement that included not only financial compensation, but also significant policy changes to prevent similar corruption in the future, including new procedures for handling evidence, mandatory review of all suicide rulings by independent medical examiners, and enhanced oversight of detective work. As I sat in my office 6 months after the trial, looking at the commendation letter from the police superintendent and the thank you cards from Sarah's family, I reflected on the Sarah Chen case and what it had taught me about justice, perseverance, and the importance of never giving up on the truth. The case had consumed 3 years of my life, involving countless hours of investigation, hundreds of interviews, and thousands of pages of documents. But it had been worth every sleepless night and every dead end. Sarah's family had finally found peace, knowing that their daughter's killer was behind bars, and that her death had not been in vain. The corruption that had allowed Marcus to escape justice had been exposed and punished, leading to significant reforms in how the Chicago Police Department handles cold cases, stores evidence, and investigates suspicious deaths. I had learned that sometimes the most important cases are the ones that everyone else has given up on, and that a single detective's refusal to accept an easy answer can make all the difference between justice and injustice. The Chen family stayed in close touch with me, sending regular updates on Kevin's progress in college and their efforts to establish the Sarah Chen Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping other families seeking justice for their loved ones and supporting reforms in the criminal justice system. The foundation provided funding for private investigators, legal assistance, and advocacy for families who believed their cases had been mishandled or covered up. As I closed the file on the Sarah Chen case for the final time, placing it in my desk drawer next to other cases that had defined my career, I knew that this was why I became a detective in the first place, to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves and to ensure that the truth, no matter how deeply buried or how powerful the forces trying to suppress it, would eventually come to light. The case had reminded me that justice delayed is not always justice denied, as long as there are people willing to fight for what's right and to never give up on the pursuit of truth. Sarah Chen's memory would live on not just in the hearts of her family and friends, but in the reforms her case had brought about and in the knowledge that her death had helped prevent other families from experiencing the same injustice and pain that the Chens had endured for so many years. The Sarah Chen case had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the courtroom and the Chicago Police Department. The story of corruption and cover-up made national headlines, leading to congressional hearings about police accountability and the need for independent oversight of law enforcement agencies. The case became a textbook example in criminal justice. Schools across the country, teaching future detectives and prosecutors about the importance of thorough investigations and the dangers of accepting easy answers to complex questions. Dr. Patricia Williams, whose courage in speaking out about the suppressed autopsy findings had been crucial to solving the case, was promoted to chief medical examiner and implemented new protocols to ensure that medical examiners could report their findings without fear of political pressure or retaliation. The evidence room where Tommy Martinez had worked was completely reorganized with new security measures, digital tracking systems, and multiple layers of oversight to prevent evidence from disappearing or being tampered with. Martinez himself, who had been intimidated into helping Rodriguez remove evidence, received counseling and was transferred to a different department where he could start fresh. The case also led to the creation of a new cold case unit within the Chicago Police Department, with dedicated detectives and resources specifically assigned to reviewing old cases that might have been mishandled or prematurely closed. I was asked to head this new unit, and over the following years, we reopened dozens of cases and solved several murders that had been incorrectly classified as suicides or accidents. The techniques and procedures we developed in the Sarah Chen case became standard protocol for cold case investigations, and we shared our methods with police departments across the country. The case also inspired changes in how police departments handle conflicts of interest and potential corruption, with new requirements for independent review of cases involving financial crimes or where officers might have personal or financial connections to suspects. 5 years after Sarah's murder was solved, I received an invitation that brought tears to my eyes. Kevin Chen was graduating from the police academy, having completed his criminal justice degree and followed through on his promise to become a detective. The graduation ceremony was held on a beautiful spring day, and I watched with pride as Kevin received his badge and took the oath to serve and protect. His parents, David and Linda, were beaming with pride, and I could see Sarah's spirit in Kevin's determination to make a difference in the world. After the ceremony, Kevin approached me and said that he wanted to work in the cold case unit to help other families find the closure that his family had finally achieved. I was honored to welcome him to the team, knowing that his personal experience within justice would make him a compassionate and determined investigator. The Sarah Chen Foundation had grown into a significant force for criminal justice reform, providing assistance to hundreds of families and funding research into best practices for investigating suspicious deaths. Linda Chen had become a powerful advocate for victims' rights, speaking at conferences and working with legislators to pass laws requiring independent review of police investigations in cases involving potential corruption. David Chen had written a book about their family's journey to justice, which became a bestseller and helped raise awareness about the importance of never giving up when fighting for the truth. The book was later adapted into a documentary film that won several awards and further spread the message about the need for police accountability and reform. Marcus Thompson, David Park, and Jennifer Walsh remained in prison, their appeals having been denied by higher courts. Rodriguez had died in federal prison, reportedly of a heart attack, though some suspected that his death was related to his cooperation with authorities in exposing other instances of police corruption. Looking back on the Sarah Chen case, I realized that it had taught me more about human nature, justice, and the importance of perseverance than any other case in my career. The investigation had shown me that evil often hides behind ordinary faces, and that the people we trust most can sometimes be the ones who betray us most deeply. Marcus Thompson had been a successful businessman, a loving boyfriend, and a respected member of his community, yet he had been capable of cold-blooded murder when his crimes were threatened with exposure. The case had also demonstrated the corrosive effect of corruption on the justice system and how a single corrupt officer could deny justice to an entire family for years. Detective Rodriguez's betrayal of his oath and his willingness to take Money to cover up a murder had been a stark reminder that law enforcement officers are not immune to temptation and that constant vigilance is required to maintain the integrity of the system. But the case had also shown me the power of persistence and the importance of never giving up when you know something is wrong. Mrs. Vasquez's determination to tell her story despite being dismissed by the original investigation had been crucial to solving the case. Dr. Williams's courage in speaking out about the suppressed autopsy findings had provided key evidence of murder. The Chen family's refusal to accept the suicide ruling and their years of fighting for justice had kept the case alive when everyone else had given up. The case had reinforced my belief that every victim deserves justice, regardless of how much time has passed or how powerful the forces trying to suppress the truth might be. Sarah Chen had been a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and she had been killed simply for trying to do the right thing by exposing fraud and corruption. Her death had meaning because it had led to justice, not just for her, but for the reform of systems that had failed her and could have failed others. As I approached retirement after 30 years in law enforcement, I took great satisfaction in knowing that the cold case unit I had helped establish was thriving under new leadership. Kevin Chen had proven to be an exceptional detective, bringing both analytical skills and emotional intelligence to his work with families who had lost loved ones to unsolved crimes. He had already solved 3 cold cases in his first 2 years on the unit, including a 20-year-old murder that had stumped previous investigators. The techniques we had developed in the Sarah Chen case were being taught at police academies across the country, and I was frequently invited to speak at conferences about the importance of thorough investigations and the dangers of accepting easy answers. The case had become a landmark in criminal justice education, studied by students who would go on to become the next generation of detectives, prosecutors, and forensic experts. The Sarah Chen Foundation had established a scholarship program for students studying criminal justice, forensic science, and law, ensuring that future professionals would be well trained and committed to the pursuit of truth and justice. The foundation also funded research into new investigative techniques and technologies that could help solve cold cases more effectively. One of the most significant developments was the creation of a national database of suspicious deaths that had been ruled suicides, allowing investigators to identify patterns and potential cases that might warrant further investigation. The database had already led to the reopening of dozens of cases across the country and had resulted in several murder convictions that might never have been achieved otherwise. The case had also inspired changes in how medical examiners report their findings, with new requirements for detailed documentation of any evidence that might suggest homicide rather than suicide, and procedures for independent review when there are questions about the cause of death. On the 10th anniversary of Sarah Chen's murder, her family organized a memorial service that brought together everyone who had been involved in seeking justice for her. The service was held in the same church where Sarah's funeral had taken place a decade earlier, but this time it was a celebration of her life and the positive changes that her death had brought about. I was honored to speak at the service, reflecting on how Sarah's case had changed not just my life, but the entire criminal justice system in Chicago and beyond. Dr. Patricia Williams spoke about the importance of medical examiners standing up for the truth, even when it's difficult or unpopular. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, now in her 80s but still sharp and determined, talked about the importance of speaking up when you witness something wrong, even if others try to dismiss you. Prosecutor Maria Santos discussed how the case had influenced her approach to other complex investigations and had reinforced her commitment to seeking justice for all victims. The service also featured a video message from Kevin Chen, who was unable to attend because he was working on a case, but who spoke movingly about how his sister's memory continued to inspire his work as a detective. The Sarah Chen Foundation announced the establishment of a new training center for cold case investigators, which would provide advanced education and resources for detectives working on unsolved crimes. The center would be located in Chicago and would serve as a hub for sharing information and best practices among law enforcement agencies across the country. As I looked around the church at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by Sarah's story, I realized that her death had indeed not been in vain. The young woman who had been killed for trying to expose the truth had become a symbol of justice and integrity that would inspire future generations of law enforcement professionals and advocates for victims' rights. As I write these final words, 15 years have passed since I first opened Sarah Chen's case file on that rainy Tuesday morning in October. The investigation that began as a routine cold case review became the defining case of my career and led to changes that continue to reverberate through the criminal justice system today. Marcus Thompson remains in prison, where he will spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. His former accomplices, David Park and Jennifer Walsh, were released after serving their sentences and have reportedly rebuilt their lives. They remain forever marked by their involvement in Sarah's murder and the subsequent cover-up. The Chicago Police Department has been transformed by the reforms that grew out of the Sarah Chen case, with new procedures, oversight mechanisms, and training programs that have made it a model for other law enforcement agencies. The cold case unit that I helped establish has solved over 100 previously unsolved murders, bringing closure to families who had given up hope of ever learning the truth about their loved ones. Kevin Chen has risen through the ranks to become a lieutenant in the unit, carrying on his sister's legacy of seeking truth and justice. The Sarah Chen Foundation continues to grow and expand its mission, now operating in 12 states and having helped over 1,000 families navigate the criminal justice system in their search for answers. Dr. Patricia Williams retired as chief medical examiner but continues to teach and consult on cases involving suspicious deaths, ensuring that future medical examiners understand the importance of thorough and independent investigation. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez passed away peacefully at the age of 87, but not before seeing the completion of the cold case training center that bears her name in recognition of her courage in speaking the truth when others tried to silence her. The case taught me that justice is not always swift, but it can be certain if there are people willing to fight for it. Sarah Chen was a young woman who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult or dangerous. Her commitment to truth cost her life, but it also ensured that her legacy would live on in the pursuit of justice for others. The detective who refused to close the case was not just me, but everyone who contributed to uncovering the truth. The medical examiner who documented the evidence, the witness who spoke up despite being dismissed, the family who never stopped fighting, and the prosecutors who ensured that justice was served. In the end, the truth revealed itself not through a single dramatic moment, but through the patient accumulation of evidence and the determination of people who refused to accept that a young woman's murder would go unpunished. Sarah Chen's case reminds us that every victim deserves justice, every family deserves answers, and every detective has a responsibility to seek the truth, no matter how long it takes or how difficult the journey might be.